So I had someone reach out to me in the DMs about an issue that they're having with their vehicle, and I'm going to try to do a video explaining what I would do at least to try to diagnose the issue. So the issue that they're having is that they're driving a 2017 Ford. For all the Chevy guys and Dodge guys and everybody else that is totally against Ford, you can just leave it at that. But the issue that they're actually having is that whenever they turn their heater on, they're not getting any hot air coming out of the vents. Now, originally, they had intermittent heat. So basically, they would get on the gas and it would blow heat out. But if they let off the gas or they're at idle, the heat would go away. So the very first thing that popped in my head was the water pump. Because if the water pump isn't pushing the coolant through the system, it's not going to get into the heater core. And it's not going to be able to put heat in your car. However, if it's just a weak water pump and you give it some gas, it might push enough fluid to get a little bit of heat just intermittently. But then they went on to say that they already had their thermostat replaced, as well as their water pump and the radiator. And after replacing all of that, they have no hot air at all. So let's take it from there. What would I do at that point? So if it was me and I was there at the vehicle, I would start the vehicle and let it run and see if it gets up to operating temperature. And if you look at your dash, it's going to be this one that looks like it's like a little flag in water, but cold is the C, hot is the H, and it should basically be right in the middle around 200 degrees. Unless it's a Chevy, and then it's probably around 220 degrees because Chevys are just hot. And right now, with it being wintertime, it might take a little bit longer for it to actually get up to operating temperature, but it should get pretty close. If it goes low, though, and it stays low and it doesn't want to climb up at least to the middle of that gauge, I'm thinking it's got something to do with the thermostat that was just installed. Because thermostats have to be placed in a certain way in order for the coolant to flow properly. Now, if the thermostat was in completely backwards, the car would probably just overheat. But if it's just not lined up correctly with like the little breather hole thing or whatever in the right location, there's a chance that it can just continuously be feeding coolant through the entire system, in which case it's never going to get really hot. But before I actually check the thermostat, what I would do is check the heater core first. As long as the engine's getting up to operating temperature, I'm going to reach in my bag and grab one of these. This is just a little heat temp gun. And I'll show you what to do, but this is my truck, and you can see this is not up to operating temperature yet, so this is just for an example. So the first thing you're going to want to do is pop your hood. And then once your hood is popped, make sure that you check to have actual coolant inside your reservoir. And then on the left-hand side of your engine bay, which is actually the right side of the car, you're going to look for the two radiator hoses that are going into the firewall, which is the backing plate going into the engine or into the place where you sit, the fucking cab. And these are the two hoses that I'm talking about. Then you're going to take your heat gun, make sure that the laser is on the hose, and see what temp you got. Right now it's at 90 degrees. And if I go to the bottom hose, it's like at 80 degrees. So we got 96, 99 degrees, 60, 70 degrees. Now when I'm measuring that, I also had my heater on, making sure the coolant that was going through that heater core. And a 10 or 20 degree difference between the inlet and the outlet is perfectly normal. That's because the air is blowing over that heater core, which is essentially just a small radiator that's pushing that hot air into your cab of your vehicle. So there should be a pretty good size difference between the two. However, it shouldn't be like 200 degrees on one side and like 80 degrees on the other. And if that's the case, your heater core is clogged and it needs to be replaced. Or you can try to back flush it maybe. I've never had good results with that. You're better off just trying to replace the dang thing. And honestly, I would probably use this gun and go around and test all the hoses just to see what the temperatures are. And again, the hose going into the top of the radiator should be a lot hotter than the one that's coming out the bottom because it's getting cooled off as it filters down through the radiator. One quick thing though, when I said 200 degrees, I'm talking about the engine operating temperature is about 200 degrees. The hoses aren't going to be that. So like right now, for example, the engine is operating temperature. I got my heater on. I'm at 116 on the inlet hose and 98 degrees, 101, 102 degrees on the outlet hose. Whoop. So then if it's only a 10 or 20 degree difference at the heater core, then the heater core is probably good to go. However, if it's really hot coming in and cold coming out, that heater core is clogged. But what do you do if everything's good up to that point? Now, this person had mentioned that they think it might be the heater control valve. Well, if that was the case, you wouldn't have hot coolant getting into the heater core like we checked with that tester. Because basically all the heater control valve does is lets the coolant go up through the heater core whenever you select heat inside the cab. Now, before I move on, there's one thing that you can do. I know that you had a whole bunch of stuff replaced on your system, so there's a good chance that air pockets and air bubbles got into the system, and that would definitely affect the heat coming out. And to be completely honest, I have almost never done a repair on a coolant system that I haven't had some kind of air trapped in the system. That is until I got a vacuum bleeder pressure tester, which is actually right here on TikTok. I got it from TikTok. It's in my showcase if you want to check it out, but you don't have to. But that's the only way that I've been able to get all the air out without having to drive the car and just try to rev it up and go up and down, faster, slower, all that kind of stuff to get it to bleed out, to burp. And you'll know exactly when that happens because if, like I explain this to my customers all the time, if they're driving down the freeway and all of a sudden the heat gauge starts rising up real quick, chances are the system burped, it sucked all the coolant into the engine, and now it's low, and now it's going to start overheating. At that point, you would just pull over and then, very slowly take off the cap of the radiator or whatever, making sure that it doesn't blow off and get coolant all over you, or you can just let it wait until it gets cool and then top it off. But now back to the next thing that I would check. Now this one's actually kind of hard to check, but you're going to be checking the controls to make sure that they're actually working. So when you take your control, you have like just a push button up and down electric control. I have the turn knob or whatever. But basically, if you go from the highest temp all the way down to the lowest temp, you should be able to hear it actually switch, and you'll hear it kind of change speeds, I guess. I don't know if you could hear that just now, but it kind of sounds like it's more low when it's on heat. And if I crank it up to the AC side, it'll start pushing out a lot more. And basically under the passenger side of the dash, you're going to have like a little door that's going to switch it back and forth depending on if you're going for heat or for cooling. But if you listen closely, you should be able to hear that door kind of actuating and going back and forth. And if it's that door and it's not actually working, it might just be stuck on the cold side of things. That's probably why it's not getting any heat, because it's not opening up, letting it go over to the heat side to push it over the heater core. Now, I'm not going to get into how to actually diagnose this because it's all electrical and it's a little bit more complicated. But basically, you just got to make sure that when you select heat, that this is sending a signal down to the door actuator to open up that door. And if the door is getting power when you select that, but it's not opening, then that's what's bad, right? Now, if it's not getting power there when you're switching it back and forth, then the actual head unit itself is probably bad. And that is probably the very best that I can do as far as trying to diagnose your system without actually being there to look at it. But basically, that kind of runs you through the entire system. And I'm going to tag another technician that's here on TikTok. He's a great guy. I love watching his content. But anyway, I'm going to tag him. Not sure if he'll come and comment or maybe do a video about it himself. But if he saw anything that I misexplained or didn't explain well enough, or he thinks it's something else, I'd love to hear what he has to say, because right now I'm not 100% sure because I can't see the vehicle itself. I'm still thinking that it's probably the heater core that's clogged. Without putting an actual temperature gauge on it. Like, you can't just grab it. It's not like feeding a baby. You can't just grab a hose and be like, okay, that one's hot and this one's hot too. Like, you need to know actual temperatures of those hoses. But if nothing else, I hope this helps.